Everyone laughed when Waitress defended the Mafia boss's disabled daughter until he stood up. The neon sign above Joe's diner buzzed with a persistent, irritating hum, a sound that seemed to vibrate right through the soles of Eliza's worn-out sneakers. It was 11 at night on a Tuesday, and the rain was hammering against the plate glass windows, turning the gritty city streets outside into a blur of gray and charcoal. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee, frying bacon, and the distinct sharp scent of lemon floor cleaner that never quite masked the grease. Eliza wiped down the counter for the third time in 10 minutes, her movements automatic. Her back ached in a dull, rhythmic throb, a reminder that this was her second double shift in 3 days. She checked the clock on the wall. 4 more hours. She did the mental math, converting hours into dollars, and then into insulin vials and rent payments. If she could just make $50 in tips tonight, she could cover the electricity bill before the final notice turned into a shutoff. The bell above the door jingled, but it was not the usual late-night crowd of truckers or weary shift workers. A group of 4 men walked in, bringing a gust of cold, damp air with them. They were dressed in suits that cost more than Eliza made in a year, their laughter loud and boisterous, carrying the arrogance of men who had never had to worry about the price of a cup of coffee. They slid into a booth near the center of the room, demanding menus before they had even settled into the vinyl seats. Eliza grabbed a notepad and walked over, forcing a polite smile onto her face. She took their orders, steaks, whiskey, and sides of mockery for everything from the decor to the menu font. She ignored it. She had learned long ago that pride did not pay for her mother's medication. As she moved to the kitchen to clip the order ticket, her gaze drifted to the corner booth, the one tucked away in the shadows near the emergency exit. A little girl sat there alone. She looked to be about 8 years old, small and fragile, with dark curls framing a pale, serious face. She was coloring in a book, her movements precise and quiet. Beside her, resting against the vinyl bench, was a pair of heavy, metal leg braces. A large man in a dark suit stood near the entrance of the diner, his back to the room, clearly her guardian. Though he seemed more interested in the street outside than the child inside, Eliza felt a pang of sympathy. The girl was always so quiet, coming in once or twice a week, usually eating a grilled cheese sandwich in silence while the world moved around her. Eliza brought the order to the center booth. The men were already drunk, their volume rising. One of them, a man with slicked-back blonde hair and a tie that was loosened at the collar, gestured toward the corner with his fork. "Hey, look at that," he said, his voice carrying across the quiet diner. "Is that a kid or a piece of machinery?" His companions roared with laughter. Eliza froze, the coffee pot heavy in her hand. She looked at the girl. The child did not look up from her coloring book, but Eliza saw the way her small hand tightened around the blue crayon until her knuckles turned white. She heard them. Of course she heard them. "Maybe she is a robot," another man chortled, spinning his whiskey glass. "Hey, kid, do you run on batteries? Do you need an oil change?" The laughter grew louder, sharper and cruel. The girl stopped coloring. She lowered her head, her hair falling forward to shield her face, shrinking into herself as if trying to disappear. Eliza felt a heat rise up her neck, a sudden, sharp flare of anger that burned hotter than the grill in the kitchen. She slammed the coffee pot down on the service station with a clatter that silenced the room for a split second. She marched over to the booth. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, warning her to stop, to think about the rent, to think about the medicine. But when she looked at the girl, so small, so humiliated, she could not stop. "Excuse me," Eliza said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. The blond man looked up, an amused smirk playing on his lips. "We didn't order a refill yet, sweetheart." "I'm not talking about the coffee," Eliza said, her tone dropping an octave, hardening into something steel-like. "I am talking about your manners. That is a child. She is minding her own business, which is something you seem incapable of doing." The table went silent. The smirk vanished from the man's face, replaced by a flash of irritation. Watch your mouth. Waitress, we are paying customers. You are bullies in expensive suits, Eliza countered, her voice rising just enough to carry. And in this diner, we treat people with respect. If you want to laugh at a little girl for something she cannot control, you can do it outside in the rain, but you will not do it here. Not on my shift. The man glared at her, his face reddening. Do you have any idea who we are? I could buy this dump and fire you in 5 minutes. Then buy it, Eliza snapped. But until the deed is signed, keep your mouth shut or get out. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. The man stared at her, waiting for her to flinch, to apologize. Eliza held his gaze, refusing to blink. Finally, the man scoffed, throwing his napkin onto the table. Let's go, he muttered to his friends. The place smells like grease anyway. They stood up, scraping their chairs loudly against the floor. They threw a few crumpled bills onto the table, barely enough to cover the food they had touched, and certainly leaving 0 tip, and stormed out. Eliza stood there, shaking slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. She looked toward the corner booth. The little girl was watching her. The child's dark eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of shock and awe. For the first time, the girl offered a tiny, tentative smile. Eliza returned it, breathing out a long, shaky sigh. "Eliza, office now!" The voice of her manager, Jerry, barked from the kitchen doorway. Eliza closed her eyes for a brief second, steeling herself, before walking to the back. Jerry was a short, anxious man who sweated profusely whenever the diner got more than 3 customers at once. He was pacing the small, cluttered office when Eliza entered. "What is wrong with you?" Jerry hissed, keeping his voice low but furious. "That was the vice president of Henderson Realty. They come here every Tuesday." "Do you know how much business you just cost me?" "They were mocking a child." "Jerry," Eliza said, crossing her arms. "They were making fun of her braces." "I don't care if they were making fun of the Pope," Jerry shouted, slamming his hand on his desk. "The customer is king. You embarrassed them, you embarrassed me." "I did what was right," Eliza said quietly. "Right doesn't pay the electric bill." "Eliza!" Jerry rubbed his temples aggressively. "You are lucky I am short-staffed. One more outburst like that, one more, and you are out on the street. Do you hear me? No tips for you tonight from the pool. Consider it a fine for your attitude." Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. "Jerry, please, my mother needs her." "Get back to work," he snapped. Turning his back on her, Eliza walked out of the office, her chest tight. No tips. That meant she was short. She was dangerously short. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep the tears from falling and went to clear the table the men had left. As she wiped the surface, a shadow fell over her. She looked up. It was the large man, the bodyguard from the corner booth. Up close. He was terrifying, a mountain of muscle with a scar running through his left eyebrow. "That was a brave thing you did," the man said. His voice was deep, like gravel grinding together. "I just don't like bullies," Eliza muttered, scrubbing a stain that wasn't there. "Cost me my job. Probably." "It won't," the man said. "Those men were fools." He paused, glancing back at the little girl who was now packing up her coloring books. "You don't know who she is, do you?" Eliza looked at the child. "Just a regular customer." The bodyguard shook his head slowly. "That is Alessia Romano. She's the daughter of Luca Romano." The rag dropped from Eliza's hand. The name hit her like a physical blow. Luca Romano. The name was whispered in this city, never spoken aloud. He was the shadow over the docks, the silent owner of half the skyline, the man the police did not touch. They said he was a monster. They said he had no heart. "Oh, God," Eliza whispered, panic flaring in her chest. "I caused a scene in front of Luca Romano's daughter. Is he going to be angry?" "Angry?" The bodyguard looked at her with an unreadable expression. "That remains to be seen." He turned and walked away, gently guiding Alicia out of the diner. As the girl passed Eliza, she reached out and touched Eliza's hand, a fleeting, soft contact, before disappearing into the rainy night. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of anxiety. Every time the door opened, Eliza flinched, expecting armed men to come in and drag her away for disrespecting the family or drawing attention to the girl. She knew the stories. You did not look at the Romanos. You certainly did not shout in front of them. By 2 a.m, the diner was empty. Jerry had left an hour ago, leaving Eliza to close up with the cook, old Pete, who was asleep in the back. The rain had not stopped. Eliza was counting the till, her hands trembling slightly when the headlights of 3 black SUVs cut through the darkness outside, illuminating the diner with blinding white beams. Her heart stopped. The door opened. The chime sounded like a death knell. 2 men in dark suits entered first, scanning the room with professional, cold efficiency. They stood on either side of the door, hands clasped in front of them. Then, a third man walked in. He was tall, moving with a predator's grace. He wore a charcoal suit that was tailored to perfection, contrasting with the worn vinyl and grease of the diner. His hair was dark, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and his eyes were the color of cold steel. It was Luca Romano. Eliza stood paralyzed behind the counter. He did not look like the monsters in the stories. He looked worse. He looked like a king who could order an execution without raising his voice. He walked straight to the counter. He did not sit. He stood there, towering over her, his presence sucking the oxygen out of the room. "You are Eliza," he stated. It was not a question. His voice was low, smooth, and utterly terrifying. "Yes," she squeaked, then cleared her throat, forcing herself to stand taller. "Yes. Can I get you coffee?" Luca studied her. His gaze felt heavy, like a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. He looked at her frayed uniform, her tired eyes, the name tag that was slightly crooked. "My daughter told me what happened tonight," Luca said. His face was impassive, giving nothing away. "She said you defended her." "She didn't deserve that," Eliza said, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. "No child does." "Most people look away when they see Alicia," Luca said, his eyes narrowing slightly, "or they stare. You are the first person in this city who has ever stood between her and the wolves." "They weren't wolves," Eliza said, surprised by her own boldness. "They were just cowards." A flicker of something, amusement, respect, crossed Luca's face. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Eliza flinched, instinctively stepping back. Luca paused, noticing the fear. He moved slowly, pulling out a thick white envelope. He placed it on the counter between them. It was thick. Even without opening it, Eliza knew there was more money in there than she made in 6 months. "For your trouble," Luca said. "And for the lost tips." Eliza looked at the envelope. She thought of the electricity bill. She thought of the pharmacy, waiting for her payment. Her hand twitched. It would be so easy. Just take it. He was a criminal. Yes, but money was money. But then she looked up at his face. He was watching her with a cynical expectation. He expected her to take it. He thought everything and everyone had a price. He figured he could pay for kindness. Eliza felt that spark of anger again, the same one she had felt with the bullies. She reached out and slid the envelope back across the counter toward him. "No," she said. Luca's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. "It is $5,000. Take it." "I didn't do it for money," Eliza said firmly. "And I don't want your money. Everyone wants money." "Eliza," Luca said, his voice dropping, becoming darker. "Do not be foolish. I know you were struggling. I know about your mother." Eliza went cold. "You investigated me?" "I know everything that happens in my city," he replied. "Take the money." "No," Eliza repeated. She leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "You can't come in here and pay me for being a decent human being. That insults me. And it insults your daughter. You don't buy respect, mister. Romano, you earn it, and kindness isn't for sale." Silence stretched between them, tight as a violin string about to snap. The men by the door shifted, hands moving toward their jackets, but Luca raised a single hand to stop them. He stared at Eliza, really looking at her for the first time. He was not looking at a waitress anymore. He was looking at an anomaly. "You don't buy respect," Luca repeated slowly, tasting the words. "No," Eliza said. "You don't—" Luca looked at the envelope, then back at her. A slow, dark smile touched his lips. It did not reach his eyes, but it changed his face, making him look less like a statue and more like a man who had just discovered a new, interesting puzzle. "Very well," he said. He picked up the envelope and slipped it back into his pocket. "You are a proud woman, Eliza. That is a dangerous quality in this city. I'm just trying to do my job," she said, her heart rate finally beginning to slow. "We shall see," Lucas said. "Good night, Eliza." He turned on his heel and walked out. The men followed. The bell jingled, and just like that, they were gone. The SUVs peeled away, disappearing into the rain. Eliza let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 10 minutes. She collapsed onto a stool, her legs shaking so hard she could barely stand. When her shift finally ended at 4 in the morning, the rain had reduced to a drizzle. Eliza wrapped her thin coat tighter around herself and stepped out the back door. She lived only 6 blocks away, a walk she had done 1,000 times, but tonight felt different. As she turned the corner onto 4th Street, she felt a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, the feeling of being watched. She glanced over her shoulder. The street was empty, just wet pavement reflecting the streetlights. She walked faster. Half a block later, she saw it. A dark sedan was moving slowly, parallel to her. On the other side of the street, its lights were off. It was crawling along at walking pace. Eliza's breath hitched. Was it the men from the diner, coming back for revenge? Or was it him, Luca Romano? She gripped her keys between her knuckles, a trick her father had taught her before he left. She hurried her pace. Almost running, the car matched her speed. It did not approach, but it did not leave. It simply hovered in the darkness, a silent, metallic guardian, or a predator waiting to strike. She reached her apartment building, fumbled with the lock, and threw herself inside, locking the heavy door behind her. She ran up the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment, bursting in and sliding the deadbolt home. She rushed to the window, peeling back the curtain just an inch to look down at the street. The dark sedan was parked directly across from her building. A man was standing by the hood, lighting a cigarette. The flame illuminated his face for a split second. It was one of the men who had stood by the door in the diner. One of Luca's men. Eliza sank to the floor, her back against the cold wall. He hadn't left. He wasn't just watching her. He was keeping her. She didn't know if she should feel safe or terrified. But as she sat there in the dark, listening to the hum of the city, she knew one thing for certain. Her life, the quiet, struggling life of a waitress, was over. She had walked into the lion's den, and the lion had decided not to let her leave. The wind off the harbor carried the bite of approaching winter, cutting through Eliza's thin denim jacket as she locked the back door of the diner. It was 3 in the morning. 2 nights after the incident with the customers, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the pavement slick and black, reflecting the amber glow of the streetlights like spilled oil. Eliza adjusted her bag on her shoulder, her knuckles white where she gripped the strap. The feeling of being watched had not dissipated. If anything, it had grown heavier, a physical weight pressing between her shoulder blades. She knew Luca Romano's men were out there. She had seen the black sedan idling 2 blocks away when she arrived for her shift. She had seen the silhouette of a man lighting a cigarette across the street during the dinner rush. She hated it. She hated the intrusion. The reminder that she had stepped onto a chessboard she did not understand. She turned toward home, walking briskly, her footsteps echoing too loudly in the empty alleyway. A shadow detached itself from the brick wall ahead of her. Eliza gasped and stumbled back, her hand instinctively flying to the pepper spray on her keychain. "Easy!" A deep voice rumbled from the darkness. The figure stepped into the pool of light cast by a flickering street lamp. It was not a thug, and it was not a bodyguard. It was Luca Romano. He was dressed less formally than he had been at the diner, wearing a dark wool overcoat with the collar turned up against the chill, his hands buried in his pockets. He looked tired. The lines around his eyes etched deeper in the stark lighting, but his presence was just as commanding. "You," Eliza breathed, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "You scared me half to death. Better me than someone who intends you harm. Luca said calmly. He fell into step beside her, not asking for permission, simply assuming his place as her escort. My men tell me you walk home alone every night. That is unwise in this neighborhood. I have been walking home alone for 5 years, Eliza retorted, though she did not stop him from walking with her. There was a strange, magnetic safety in his presence that contradicted the danger of his reputation. And I didn't have problems until I met you. You had problems, Luca corrected, his gaze scanning the rooftops and alley mouths as they walked. You just didn't see them. Ignorance is a shield, Eliza, but it is a thin one. Now that shield is gone. They walked in silence for a block. The city was asleep, the only sounds the distant wail of a siren and the rhythmic click of their shoes on the concrete. Why are you doing this? Eliza asked finally, looking up at his profile. The bodyguards. Being here yourself. I refused your money. I am just a waitress. Surely the great Luca Romano has better things to do than babysit a woman who yelled at some bullies. Luca stopped. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the gloom. My daughter asked for you. Eliza blinked, taken aback. Alessia? She has not spoken much since her mother died, Luca said. The words were flat, factual, but Eliza heard the jagged edge of pain beneath them. She withdraws. She hides. But for 2 days, she has talked of nothing but the lady at the diner, the one who made the bad men leave. He looked away, staring down the empty street. For a moment, the mask of the ruthless crime boss slipped, revealing a man who was profoundly lost. She is lonely, Eliza said softly. She is broken, Luca replied harshly. And I broke her. Eliza frowned. What do you mean? She has a disability, and that isn't your fault. The accident, Luca said. He pulled a silver lighter from his pocket, flipping it open and shut, a nervous tick. 3 years ago, I was driving. There was a complication. A car forced us off the road. My wife died instantly. Alicia survived, but her legs were crushed. She was 5 years old. The revelation hung in the cold air between them. Eliza felt a sudden wave of sorrow crash over her. The rumors painted him as a monster, a man of violence. But standing here, he was just a father consumed by a guilt so massive it threatened to swallow him whole. It wasn't your fault, Eliza said, her voice firm. I was the target, Luca said, his eyes snapping back to hers, cold and hard again. The car that hit us was sent for me. My wife and daughter paid the price for my life, so do not tell me it was not my fault. Every step she struggles to take is a reminder of my sin. Eliza reached out, almost touching his arm, but stopped herself. So you isolate her? You keep her behind walls and bodyguards to keep her safe. I keep her alive, Luca said. That is all I can do. She needs more than just to be alive. Luca, Eliza said, using his first name without thinking. She needs to live. She needs connection. She liked me because I didn't look at her with pity, and I didn't look past her. I saw her. Luca studied her face, searching for something. Deceit, perhaps, or fear. He found neither. Come tomorrow, he said abruptly, to the house. Alessia wants to see you. I have a shift. I will pay for your shift, he interrupted. I will pay for your month. Just come, please. The please was quiet, almost foreign on his tongue. It broke Eliza's resistance completely. Okay, she whispered. I will come. The Romano estate was not a house. It was a fortress disguised as a mansion, located on the cliffs overlooking the city. It was surrounded by 10-foot iron gates and patrolled by men who looked like they chewed gravel for breakfast. When Eliza arrived the next afternoon, a town car having picked her up from her apartment, she felt entirely out of place in her simple jeans and knit sweater. The foyer was a cavern of marble and gold, beautiful but utterly devoid of warmth. It felt like a museum where touching anything was forbidden. Luca met her at the top of the stairs. He was wearing a gray vest over a white shirt, his sleeves rolled up, looking less like a mobster and more like a weary aristocrat. She is in the garden, he said, gesturing toward the back of the house. Eliza followed him. The garden was the one part of the house that felt alive, walled in by high stone fences. It was a riot of blooming hydrangeas and rose bushes. Alessia was sitting on a stone bench, reading a book. When she saw Eliza, her face lit up with a brightness that transformed her. "Eliza!" she called out, her voice clear and sweet. Eliza smiled, walking over and crouching down so she was at eye level with the girl. "Hi, Alessia. I heard you wanted a visitor." For the next 2 hours, the heavy atmosphere of the Romano world faded away. Eliza and Alessia talked about everything and nothing. They talked about colors, about the stray cat that lived behind the diner, about Alessia's favorite books. Eliza braided the girl's hair, her fingers gentle and deft, while Alicia giggled, a sound that seemed to startle the birds in the trees. Luca stood on the terrace, leaning against the stone balustrade, watching them. He had intended to work, to review the ledgers that detailed the smuggling routes through the docks, but he could not tear his eyes away. He watched the way Eliza touched his daughter, without hesitation, without the flinch of fear he was used to seeing in people. He saw the way Alicia leaned into her, starving for a maternal touch she barely remembered. A knot of complicated emotion tightened in Luca's chest. He felt a fierce protectiveness, not just over Alessia, but over the scene itself. He wanted to freeze this moment, to keep this warmth within his cold walls. But alongside the warmth came fear. Eliza was a civilian. She was soft, and in his world, soft things were crushed. "She likes you," Luca said, his voice startling Eliza as he finally walked down the stone steps to join them. Eliza looked up, smiling. "She's a wonderful kid. Smart, too." "She has a math test tomorrow," Luca said, looking at his daughter sternly but with affection, "which she should be studying for." Alessia groaned theatrically. "But Papa, I hate fractions." "Fractions are necessary," Luca said. "Go, Mrs. Rossi has your snack in the kitchen." Alessia grabbed her crutches, maneuvering herself up with practiced ease. She hugged Eliza quickly before hobbling toward the house. "Bye, Eliza. Come back soon." When she was gone, silence settled over the garden. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, golden shadows across the grass. "Thank you," Luca said, looking at the ground. "I have not heard her laugh like that in a long time." "She just needs to be a kid," Eliza said. "You carry the weight of the world. Luca, you don't have to make her carry it too." Luca looked at her, his eyes intense. He took a step closer. "And what about you? Eliza, you carry a weight too. Your mother, the double shifts. Who helps you carry that?" "I manage," Eliza said, her breath catching slightly at his proximity. He smelled of sandalwood and tobacco, a scent that was intoxicatingly masculine. "You shouldn't have to," he murmured. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face as if he wanted to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, but he pulled back at the last second, the restraint visible in the tension of his jaw. "I should go," Eliza said, her voice trembling. The air between them was suddenly too thick, charged with an electricity she didn't know how to handle. "Yes," Luca said, stepping back, his face closing off again. "The driver is waiting." The reality of her two worlds collided the next evening. Eliza was taking the trash out to the dumpster behind the diner. The alley was dark, smelling of rotting vegetables and stagnant water. As she tossed the heavy black bag into the bin, a figure stepped out from behind a stack of crates. It was not Luca. The man was shorter, stockier, wearing a leather jacket that creaked as he moved. He had a thick gold chain around his neck and a toothpick rolling between his teeth. His eyes were cold, dead things. "You are the waitress," the man said. His voice was oily, sliding over her skin like slime. Eliza backed up, hitting the dumpster. "Who are you?" "A friend of the community." The man smirked. "My name is Dante. I hear you have been spending time up on the hill with the Romanos." "That is none of your business," Eliza said, trying to keep her voice steady. Dante stepped closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of cheap cologne and stale cigars. He placed a hand on the wall beside her head, boxing her in. He didn't touch her, but the threat was clear. "It is my business," Dante hissed. See, Luca Romano thinks he owns this city. He thinks he can do whatever he wants, but people are getting tired of him. And you are a new weakness. I am nobody, Eliza said. You are somebody to him, Dante said. We see the way he watches the diner. We see the car picking you up. Here is a warning. Sweetheart, stay away from Romano business. If you are standing next to him when the house of cards falls, you are going to get crushed. He leaned in, his face inches from hers. Find a new job, find a new boyfriend, or things are going to get very ugly, very fast. He pushed off the wall, spat the toothpick onto the ground near her shoes, and walked away into the shadows. Eliza stood there for a full minute, shaking, before she ran back inside the diner, locking the heavy steel door behind her. She didn't call Luca. She didn't have to. 2 hours later, as she was wiping down the counter, the front door of the diner burst open. It hit the wall with a crack that made everyone jump. Luca stormed in. He was not the calm, collected aristocrat she had seen in the garden. He was a storm in human form. His eyes were wild with fury, his face a mask of lethal intent. 4 of his men trailed behind him, hands inside their jackets, scanning the room for threats. He marched straight to Eliza, grabbing her upper arms. His grip was tight, desperate. "Did he touch you?" Luca demanded, his voice a low roar. "What?" Eliza stammered, shocked by his intensity. "Moretti's man. Dante. Did he touch you?" Luca shook her slightly. "Tell me." "No," Eliza said. "No, he threatened me. He told me to stay away from you." Luca released her. Spinning around, he pulled his phone from his pocket, dialing a number. His knuckles were white. "It's me," Luca barked into the phone. "Bring me Dante. Tonight. I don't care where he is. Burn his house down if you have to. I want his head on my desk by morning." The violence in his voice was naked and terrifying. This was the monster the city feared. "Luca, stop!" Eliza shouted. She ran around the counter, grabbing his hand, the one holding the phone. He looked down at her, his eyes glazed with red rage. "He threatened you," Luca snarled. "No one touches what is mine." "I am not yours," Eliza cried. "And you cannot just kill people because they talk to me. Is this who you are? Is this who you want Alicia to know?" The mention of his daughter's name was like a splash of cold water. Luca froze. He stared at Eliza, his chest heaving. The voice on the other end of the phone was asking for orders. "Stand down," Luca whispered into the phone, never taking his eyes off Eliza. "Wait for my signal." He hung up. He looked around the diner. Jerry was hiding behind the cash register. The few customers were terrified. "Outside," Luca said. "Now." He grabbed her hand again, dragging her not roughly but insistently out the door and toward his waiting car. He didn't shove her in. He opened the back door, ushered her inside, and climbed in after her. "Drive," he ordered the driver. "Go to the office." The ride was silent and tense. When they arrived at a nondescript building downtown, one of his fronts, he marched her up to the top floor, into a large, dimly lit study lined with mahogany bookshelves. He slammed the door shut and turned on her. "You do not tell me how to handle my business," Luca said, his voice shaking with suppressed adrenaline. "That animal threatened you. In my world, that is a death sentence. I don't want to be part of your world if it means blood on the pavement," Eliza shouted back, her own fear turning into anger. "You say you want to protect me? This isn't protection, Luca. This is war, and I didn't sign up for a war. You didn't have a choice." Luca paced the room, running a hand through his hair. "You saved my daughter. That puts a target on your back. I am trying to keep you alive. I was alive before I met you." Eliza stepped closer to him, poking him in the chest. "I was poor, and I was tired, but I wasn't being hunted by gangsters. You bring chaos with you, Luca. I know." Luca roared, spinning to face her. "I know I am poison. Eliza, do you think I don't know that? Why do you think I tried to pay you off? Why do you think I tried to stay away?" "Then why didn't you?" Eliza challenged, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Why are you still here?" Luca stared at her. The anger drained out of him, replaced by something far more dangerous. Hunger. Because I couldn't, he confessed, his voice rough. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides. He trapped her against the heavy oak desk, his hand slamming down on the wood on either side of her waist. He loomed over her, his body radiating heat. Eliza's breath hitched. She should be terrified. He was a killer. He had just ordered a hit 5 minutes ago, but looking up into his eyes, she didn't see the killer. She saw a man who was starving. "You terrify me," she whispered. "Good," Luca growled. "You should run. Eliza, you should run out that door and never look back." "I can't," she admitted. Luca's gaze dropped to her lips. The air in the room seemed to vanish. The tension was a physical thing, a taut wire pulling them together. He leaned in. Slow. Agonizingly slow. Eliza could feel his breath on her cheek, hot and erratic. She tilted her head back, her eyes fluttering shut, her body betraying her mind. She wanted him. God help her. She wanted the monster. His nose brushed against hers. His hand moved from the desk to cup her jaw, his thumb tracing the line of her lower lip. It was a touch so gentle it made her tremble. "Eliza," he breathed, her name a prayer and a curse. The sound of her name broke the spell. The reality of who he was, of the violence she had just witnessed, came crashing back. If she kissed him now, there was no going back. She would be his. And that meant she would belong to the darkness. Panic surged. Not fear of him, but fear of what she would become. Eliza gasped, ducking under his arm. I can't." She didn't wait for his response. She turned and ran. She ran out of the study, past the confused guards in the hallway, and down the stairs. She didn't stop until she hit the cold night air of the street, gasping for breath, her lips still burning from the kiss that hadn't happened. Up in the tower, Luca Romano stood by the window, watching her running figure disappear into the city. He brought his hand to his mouth, tracing the spot where he had almost tasted her, and cursed himself to hell. The bell above the door of Joe's Diner had become a sound that accelerated Eliza's pulse, not out of fear, but out of an anticipation she was terrified to name. In the 2 weeks since she had fled from Luca's study, the dynamic between them had shifted into something confusing, persistent, and undeniable. Luca Romano did not chase. He did not beg. He simply occupied space. He began appearing at the diner not just during the late shifts to intimidate unruly customers, but in the daylight, often with Alessia in tow. He would sit in the corner booth, nursing a black coffee, watching Eliza work while his daughter colored in her books. He found reasons to speak to her, trivial things at first, asking about the specials or commenting on the weather, but quickly deepening into questions about her life, her opinions, her thoughts. He was weaving himself into the fabric of her days. When she walked home, the black sedan was always there, purring half a block behind her. When her landlord threatened to evict her over a late payment, the man suddenly called to say the issue had been resolved administratively, a phrase that reeked of Romano intervention. Eliza wanted to be angry, to assert her independence, but she was too exhausted to fight a tide that was so intent on carrying her to safety. On a crisp Thursday evening, the air biting with the promise of frost, Luca waited for her shift to end. This time, he did not stay in the car. He stood on the sidewalk, leaning against the passenger door, the streetlights casting long, sharp shadows across his face. "Dinner," he said simply as she exited the back door. "I have leftovers at home," Eliza replied, tightening her scarf. "You have a half-eaten sandwich and an empty refrigerator," Luca countered effortlessly. "Alessia is with her tutor. Come. I want to talk to you without the smell of grease and the fear of your manager hovering over us." Eliza hesitated. Every instinct she had screamed that this was dangerous, that he was dangerous. But she looked at his eyes, dark, guarded, yet searching, and nodded. The drive to the mansion was silent, but it was a comfortable silence. When they arrived, the house felt different than before. The imposing coldness seemed to have thawed slightly. A fire was crackling in the smaller, more intimate dining room, casting a warm, flickering glow over the table set for two. Dinner was simple but exquisite. roasted chicken, vegetables, and a bottle of wine that likely cost more than Eliza's rent for the year. For the first hour, they navigated the conversation carefully, like two soldiers walking through a minefield. But as the wine lowered their defenses, the talk turned to the past. "I was not born into this suit," Luca said, swirling the deep red liquid in his glass. He looked into the fire, his expression distant. "My father was a dock worker. He died when a crate snapped loose. It was negligence, but the company paid nothing. My mother scrubbed the floors until her hands bled." Eliza watched him, fascinated by the crack in his armor. "Is that why you chose this life? To make them pay?" "To make sure I never had to scrub a floor," Luca corrected, his voice hardening. "To make sure that when I spoke, men listened. In my world, Eliza, you are either the hammer or the nail. I chose to be the hammer. It is a lonely way to live," she murmured. "It was," he said, his gaze shifting to her. "Until recently." Eliza looked down at her plate, her heart fluttering. "My father didn't die," she confessed quietly. "He just left. One day he went for cigarettes and never came back. Mom fell apart. I became an adult when I was 10 years old. I learned that you can't rely on anyone to save you. You just have to keep working until you drop." "You are wrong," Luca said. Eliza looked up. "You do not have to save yourself anymore," he said softly. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a sudden, intense gravity. Luca stood up and walked around the table. He stopped beside her chair, extending a hand. Eliza took it, her fingers trembling slightly as she rose. They stood inches apart in the firelight. The world outside, the guns, the gangs, the diner ceased to exist. There was only the heat of his body, the scent of sandalwood and power, and the undeniable pull between them. Luca raised his hand, his fingers grazing her cheek, rough skin against soft. He traced the line of her jaw, his touch agonizingly slow. Eliza leaned into it instinctively, her eyes closing. She felt his breath hitch. "Eliza," he whispered. It was a question and a declaration all at once. She opened her eyes. His face was close, so close she could count the flecks of gold in his dark irises. He lowered his head. She tilted hers back. Their lips brushed, a feather-light contact that sent a jolt of electricity straight to her core. It was not a kiss, but a promise of one. Then, a sharp cry shattered the moment. "Papa!" It was a scream of pure distress coming from the upper floor. Luca pulled back instantly, the softness vanishing from his face, replaced by alert panic. "Alessia!" He turned and ran. Eliza followed without thinking, her heels clicking rapidly on the marble stairs. They burst into Alicia's bedroom. The little girl was thrashing in her bed, tangled in the silk sheets, her face flushed a deep, alarming red. She was sobbing, delirious. "She is burning up," Luca said, his voice tight with fear as he placed a hand on her forehead. "Mrs. Rossi, call the doctor." The elderly housekeeper appeared in the doorway, wringing her hands. "The doctor is on his way, sir, but the storm has closed the bridge. It will be an hour." Luca looked down at his daughter, the most powerful man in the city rendered utterly helpless by a fever. He looked ready to tear the world apart, but he didn't know how to fight this. Eliza stepped forward. She didn't ask for permission. She moved past Luca, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Hey, sweetie," Eliza cooed, brushing the damp hair back from Alessia's forehead. "It is okay. Eliza is here." "It hurts," Alicia whimpered, her eyes glassy. "I know," Eliza said soothingly. She looked up at Luca. "Get me a bowl of cool water and some washcloths. And find some children's ibuprofen. Now." Luca blinked, stunned by her command, and then obeyed immediately. For the next 4 hours, Eliza did not leave Alicia's side. She bathed the girl's forehead with cool cloths. She coaxed the medicine down her throat with gentle whispers, and she held her when the chills made her small body shake. She hummed soft songs, melodies her mother had sung to her before the illness took over. Luca stood in the doorway for most of it, watching. He watched the woman he had tried to buy, the woman he had tried to scare away, saving the only thing that mattered to him. He saw a strength in her that rivaled any soldier he commanded. It was a quiet, enduring strength, The strength of a woman who had held her own world together with nothing but grit. By 3 a.m, the fever broke. Alessia fell into a deep, peaceful sleep, her breathing even. Eliza slumped back in the chair beside the bed, exhausted. She rubbed her eyes, her makeup smudged. "You should sleep," Luca said. He was standing right beside her. She hadn't heard him move. "I want to make sure she stays cool," Eliza whispered. "I will watch her," Luca said. "Go. The guest room across the hall is prepared. Please." Eliza was too tired to argue. She nodded and stood up, swaying slightly. Luca reached out to steady her, his hands lingering on her arms for a moment too long before letting go. She found the guest room, on the bed. Someone had laid out a t-shirt, one of Luca's, large and black. She stripped off her uniform, which smelled of the diner, and pulled on the shirt. It swallowed her frame, smelling of him. She crawled into the massive bed and was asleep in seconds. She woke to the sound of shouting. Sunlight was streaming through the heavy curtains, but the voice cracking through the door was dark and violent. Eliza sat up, disoriented. The memories of the night before rushed back. Alessia, the fever, the near kiss at dinner. She slid out of bed, padding barefoot across the plush carpet. She opened the door slightly. The shouting was coming from Luca's office down the hall. The door was ajar. "I do not care what excuse he has," Luca's voice roared, vibrating with a terrifying fury. "He sold the route to the Russians. He betrayed the family." Eliza crept closer, drawn by a morbid curiosity and a sinking feeling in her gut. Through the crack in the door, she saw him. Luca was pacing behind his desk. He was still wearing his dress pants from dinner, but his shirt was unbuttoned, his hair wild. He held a phone to his ear with a grip that looked like it could crush the device. "Find him," Luca ordered. "And when you find him, I want you to break his legs. Both of them. Then bring him to the warehouse. I will finish it myself." The violence of the words hit Eliza like a physical slap. Break his legs. Finish it myself. This was not the man who had looked at her with longing by the fire. This was not the father who had watched his daughter with terrified eyes. This was the monster the city whispered about. She pushed the door open. It creaked. Luca spun around. His eyes were wild, still caught in the adrenaline of the kill order. When he saw her, standing there in his shirt, her hair messy, looking small and horrified, he froze. "Eliza," he said, lowering the phone. "Finish it yourself?" Eliza repeated, her voice trembling. "What does that mean, Luca?" "Go back to your room," Luca said, his voice dropping, trying to regain control. "This does not concern you. It concerns me when the man whose shirt I am wearing is ordering torture." Eliza stepped into the room. "Is that how you solve problems? You break people?" "I will protect my business," Luca snapped, the stress of the night and the fever finally breaking his composure. "I protect my family. That man put my men at risk. He put my daughter at risk by weakening our position." "And that gives you the right to be an executioner?" Eliza shouted back. "You stood over Alicia's bed last night, terrified she would be hurt, and now you are ordering someone else's pain? How do you live with that hypocrisy? It is not hypocrisy. It is survival." Luca slammed his hand on the desk. "You think the world is kind, Eliza? You think I can ask them nicely to leave us alone? I am a monster so she can be a princess. I walk in the blood so she never has to touch it. But you are bringing it home." Eliza pointed a shaking finger at him. "You can't raise her in blood, Luca. It seeps in. It stains everything. Look at you. You are ready to kill a man before breakfast. What happens when Alicia is old enough to understand? Do you think she will be proud?" "Stop it," Luca roared. "No." Eliza didn't back down. She walked right up to the desk, tears stinging her eyes. "I saw a good man last night. I saw a father, but this is poison. And if you keep drinking it, you will die. Or worse, you will make her watch you die." Luca stared at her, his chest heaving, the anger in his eyes warred with shame. He looked at the phone in his hand, then at her. He threw the phone across the room. It smashed against the far wall, shattering into plastic shards. Silence crashed into the room, sudden and deafening. "Do not judge me," Luca whispered, his voice cracking. "You do not know what I carry. I'm not judging you, Eliza said softly, walking around the desk until she stood directly in front of him. I am fighting for you, because I think you are worth saving. Even if you don't. Luca looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the fear, yes, but he also saw a fierce, burning loyalty. She was standing in the center of his violence, wearing his clothes, and she wasn't running away. She was trying to pull him out of the dark. Something inside him snapped, not a break, but a release. He reached out, grabbing her waist, pulling her hard against him. Eliza! He groaned. Luca! She breathed. He didn't give her time to think. He crashed his lips onto hers. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't the sweet, hesitant brush of lips from the night before. It was desperate. It was the kiss of a drowning man finding air. His hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back, deepening the contact until they were both gasping. Eliza responded instantly, her arms wrapping around his neck, pulling him closer. She could taste the fury and the fear on him, but beneath it, she tasted the man. She tasted his need. He kissed her like he wanted to devour her, to hide inside her and forget the world outside the window. His stubble grazed her skin. His hands roamed over the back of the t-shirt, pressing her flush against his hard chest. She felt the rapid, thundering beat of his heart against hers. For a long moment, there was no Mafia, no diner, no threats. There was only this fire, this terrifying, consuming heat that welded them together. Luca pulled back just an inch, his forehead resting against hers, their breath mingling in short, ragged gasps. His hands were shaking as they held her face. I cannot be a good man, he whispered, his voice raw. I don't know how. Eliza opened her eyes, looking into the storm of his gaze. She ran her thumb over his lip. Then learn, she whispered. For her and for me? Luca closed his eyes, letting out a shuddering breath, holding her as if she were the only solid thing in a crumbling world. And in the silence of the study, with the broken phone on the floor and the morning sun watching, the contract was sealed. He was no longer just fighting for power. He was fighting for his soul. The city was vanishing in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the gray fog of early morning, but the tension inside the armored SUV remained suffocatingly thick. Luca drove with a white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel, his eyes darting constantly to the side mirrors. In the back seat, Alessia was sound asleep, her head resting against a travel pillow, oblivious to the fact that they were not going on a vacation, but an evacuation. Eliza sat in the passenger seat, her hands clasped in her lap. She watched the urban sprawl give way to rolling hills and dense pine forests. Luca had shown up at her apartment at 4 a.m, telling her to pack a bag. He had not asked. He had commanded. He said the situation downtown had escalated. He said it was no longer safe for Alicia to be near the windows. He said he needed Eliza to come because Alessia would not go without her. They drove for 3 hours until the road turned into a gravel track winding up a steep hill. At the summit stood a stone villa, ancient and imposing, surrounded by vineyards that looked stark and bare in the winter chill. It was beautiful, but it felt like what it was, a fortress disguised as a home. We are safe here, Luca said, breaking the long silence as he killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, not with peace, but with the things they were not saying. The day passed in a blur of nervous energy. Luca spent hours on the phone in the study, pacing, his voice muffled by the heavy oak door. Eliza tried to keep Alicia distracted, playing board games in the expansive living room, but even the child sensed the anxiety. Alicia kept looking at the front door, asking when they could go outside, and Eliza had to keep inventing reasons why they had to stay indoors. By evening, a storm had rolled in off the coast. Thunder rumbled like distant artillery fire, shaking the window panes. The wind howled through the chimney, and then, with a sharp crack of lightning, the world went black. The power cut was instant and total. Alessia let out a small yelp of fear. It is okay, Eliza said quickly, her voice calm despite her own jumping heart. Just a power outage, like an adventure. Luca appeared from the hallway, a flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. He looked calmer now, as if the loss of electricity was a problem he could actually solve. Unlike the chaos in the city, "The generator is acting up," he said, his voice deep and steady. "I will check it in the morning. For now, we use the old ways." Within 20 minutes, the living room was transformed. Luca had lit dozens of thick beeswax candles, placing them on the mantelpiece, the coffee table, and the floor. The room glowed with a soft, flickering amber light that softened the sharp edges of the furniture and the worry on their faces. They ate a dinner of cold sandwiches and fruit on the rug in front of the fireplace. Alessia, exhausted by the excitement and the storm, fell asleep with her head on Eliza's lap. Luca carried his daughter upstairs, his movements tender and careful, leaving Eliza alone in the sea of candlelight. When he returned, he poured 2 glasses of wine and sat down on the rug beside her. He loosened his tie, tossing his jacket onto a chair in the firelight. He looked younger, the hard lines of his face smoothed out by the dancing shadows. "Thank you," Luca said quietly, "for keeping her calm. She trusts you," Eliza said, taking the wine glass he offered. "She wasn't scared because you weren't scared." "I am always scared," Luca admitted, his voice a low rumble. He looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the flames, but not of the dark. "I am scared of what the light reveals." "And what does it reveal?" Eliza asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That I have something to lose," he replied. He reached out, taking the glass from her hand and setting it on the floor. Then he took her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. His palm was warm, rough with calluses, a stark contrast to the softness of her skin. "I brought you here because I could not focus," Luca confessed, moving closer until their knees touched. "Every minute I was in the city. I was wondering where you were. I was wondering if you were safe. It made me weak. I need you here so I can breathe. Eliza, I am not a hostage. Luca," she whispered, though her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "No," he murmured, raising her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles one by one. "You are my anchor." The atmosphere shifted, thickening with a desire that had been simmering for weeks. It was no longer the frantic, desperate energy of the study. This was slow. It was heavy. It was inevitable. Luca leaned forward, his hand moving to cup the back of her neck, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin behind her ear. Eliza shivered, leaning into his touch. When he kissed her, it was with a reverence that stole the breath from her lungs. His lips were soft, tasting of wine and longing. He pulled back slightly, asking a silent question with his eyes. Eliza answered by reaching for the buttons of his shirt. They moved together with an agonizing slowness, stripping away the layers of defense they had both worn for so long. When his shirt fell away, revealing the scars on his chest and shoulders, maps of a violent life, Eliza traced them with her fingertips, not with judgment, but with sorrow. Luca shuddered at her touch, closing his eyes as if her hands were healing old wounds. He laid her back on the thick rug, the firelight painting her skin in shades of gold and bronze. He looked at her as if she were a masterpiece he was afraid to touch, yet unable to resist. "Eliza," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I will never let anything hurt you." "I know," she replied, pulling him down to her. Their lovemaking was a conversation without words. It was in the way he held his weight off her, supporting himself on his forearms to gaze down at her face, memorizing every curve and lash. It was in the way she arched into him, anchoring him to the earth, showing him that he was more than the violence he commanded. Every movement was deliberate, every breath shared. It was a reclaiming of humanity in the midst of a war. When they finally found their rhythm, it was deep and all-consuming, a slow-burning fire that fused them together. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of the emotion pouring out of him. He wasn't taking. He was giving everything he had. Afterward, they lay tangled together under a wool blanket, the candles burning low. Luca held her against his chest, his arm draped protectively over her waist. He kissed the top of her head, the scent of her hair filling his senses. For the first time in years, the king of the underworld slept without a weapon within reach, guarded only by the woman in his arms. The morning sun broke through the heavy curtains, dusty and bright. Eliza woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She stretched, her body humming with a pleasant ache, and realized she was alone on the rug. She pulled on Luca's discarded shirt and walked into the kitchen. The sight that greeted her made her stop in the doorway. Luca was at the stove, flipping pancakes. He was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, his feet bare. Alessia was sitting at the island, swinging her legs, giggling as she tried to catch blueberries he was tossing to her. "Got it!" Alessia cheered as she caught one. Luca laughed, a rich, genuine sound that Eliza had never heard before. He turned and saw Eliza standing there. His smile softened, turning into something intimate and warm. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," Eliza replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. He walked over to her, ignoring the spatula in his hand, and kissed her forehead. "Coffee is on the counter. Sit, the chef is working." Breakfast was chaotic and wonderful. They ate pancakes that were slightly burnt, drank coffee, and planned a hypothetical garden they would plant in the spring. For an hour, they were just a family, a normal, happy family. But the bubble was fragile, and the world outside was sharp. By noon, the phone in Luca's pocket buzzed. He checked it, and the warmth vanished from his face instantly. The mask slammed back down. "Pack your things," he said, his voice clipped and cold. "We have to go back, now." The drive back to the city was faster, more reckless. Luca was on the phone constantly, speaking in rapid-fire Italian, his tone aggressive. Eliza held Alicia's hand in the back seat, fear knotting in her stomach. When they arrived at the mansion, the gates were flanked by double the usual number of guards. They were ushered inside quickly. "Take Alessia to her room," Luca ordered Mrs. Rossi. "Luca, what is happening?" Eliza demanded as soon as the child was gone. Luca walked into the living room, turning on the large television mounted on the wall, and he didn't answer. He just pointed at the screen. It was a local news channel. The banner at the bottom read, "Gang war escalates. Civilian targets threatened." But it wasn't the news report that froze Eliza's blood. It was the phone call Luca took next, putting it on speaker because he was shaking too hard to hold it to his ear. It was his lieutenant, Marco. "Boss," Marco's voice crackled. "It is confirmed the Moretti family has put a price out, but not on you." "On who?" Luca growled, though he already knew. "On the girl," Marco said. "The waitress, Eliza. They are offering $500,000 to anyone who brings her to them, alive or dead. They know she is your weakness." Eliza stared at the phone, the room spinning. $500,000, a bounty. On her head, Luca ended the call and looked at her. "You cannot leave this house, not until I fix this." "Fix this?" Eliza's voice was high, shrill. "How long have you known?" "Know what?" "That I was a target," she shouted. "You dragged me to the villa not just for the storm. You knew they were coming for me." "I suspected," Luca admitted, stepping toward her. "I wanted to get you out before it was confirmed." "You lied to me!" Eliza backed away. "You made me believe we were going on a trip to Alicia. You didn't tell me that people are hunting me like an animal. If I told you, you would have panicked. I have a right to panic. It is my life." Eliza felt the tears hot on her face. "You didn't tell me the danger was real. You let me sleep in your bed. You let me play house with your daughter, all while knowing there is a price tag on my head because of you. I am protecting you," Luca roared, slamming his hand against the wall. "I am the only thing standing between you and a bullet." "You are the reason the bullet is there," Eliza screamed back. "I was a waitress. Luca, I worried about tips and rent. Now I am worth $500,000 dead because I cared about you, because I loved you?" The word hung in the air. Loved. Past tense. Luca went still. "Eliza, please, you are safe here." "I'm not safe anywhere near you," she sobbed. "You said you couldn't be a good man. You were right. A good man doesn't turn the woman he loves into a target." She ran to the door. "Where are you going?" Luca shouted, panic edging into his voice. "You cannot go out there." "I'm going to my friend Sarah's," Eliza said, grabbing her purse. "She lives in the suburbs. Nobody knows her. Nobody knows I know her. I will be safer there than in this fortress of yours that everyone is trying to blow up. Eliza! No! Luca lunged for her. Grabbing her arm, she ripped it away, looking at him with a mixture of love and horror. Don't touch me. If you truly want to protect me, let me go. Let me disappear until you finish your war. Luca stood frozen, his hand hovering in the air. He could stop her. He could lock her in a room for her own good. But looking at the fear and betrayal in her eyes, he knew that if he trapped her now, he would lose her forever. He lowered his hand. Take the back exit, he whispered hoarsely. Take the gray sedan. It is not tracked. Eliza didn't say goodbye. She turned and ran. Sarah's apartment was small, smelling of cat litter and cinnamon. It was a world away from the marble and velvet of the Romano mansion. Eliza sat on the lumpy couch, staring at the blank television screen. She'd been there for 4 hours. She had turned off her phone, terrified they could track the signal, but she couldn't escape the silence. Then, Sarah's landline rang. Eliza jumped. Sarah, who was making tea in the kitchen, picked it up. She frowned, listening, then held the receiver out to Eliza. It is a little girl, Sarah whispered, confused. She is crying. Eliza's heart shattered. She took the phone. Alicia! Eliza! The voice was small, broken by heavy, gasping sobs. Where did you go? Papa is breaking things. He's throwing chairs in the library. He says you went away. I had to go for a little while. Honey, Eliza said, tears streaming down her own face. Did I do something bad? Alessia wailed. Is it because of my legs? I can walk faster. I promise. Please come back. No, baby, no, Eliza cried, clutching the phone cord. You are perfect. You are the best girl in the world. This isn't about you. It is about grown-up things, dangerous things. I am scared, Alessia whispered. The house is too big without you. Papa is scared too. I saw him crying in the kitchen. Please, Eliza, please come home. Eliza squeezed her eyes shut. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to run back, to hold the little girl, to comfort the man who was destroying his own house in grief. But she saw the news headline in her mind. $500,000. If she went back, she was a weakness. If she stayed away, maybe they would focus on Luca, and he could fight like the soldier he was, unburdened by her. I can't come right now. Alessia, Eliza choked out. But I love you. You be brave, okay? I will call you soon. She hung up the phone before her resolve crumbled completely. She curled into a ball on the couch, burying her face in a cushion, and screamed silently. Night fell, heavy and suffocating. Sarah had gone to bed, leaving Eliza alone in the living room. Eliza couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, peering through the blinds at the quiet suburban street. Every passing car looked like a black SUV. Every shadow looked like a gunman. She turned on the small TV. Keeping the volume low, the news was on. A warehouse downtown had just exploded. Romano territory. The war was not just escalating, it was exploding. Suddenly, a sound cut through the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Scratch, click. It came from the front door. Eliza froze. She held her breath. Scratch, click. Someone was picking the lock. Sarah lived on the second floor. There was no other way out. Eliza slid off the couch, her blood turning to ice. She crawled across the floor toward the kitchen, grabbing the biggest knife from the block. Her hands were shaking so violently she almost dropped it. The lock clicked. The doorknob turned slowly. The door creaked open. A silhouette stood in the doorway. It was too small to be Luca. It was too thin to be a bodyguard. The figure stepped into the dim light of the hallway. It was a man in a hoodie, holding a suppressed pistol. He wasn't a professional soldier. He looked like a street thug, a freelancer looking for a payday. The bounty. They had found her, even here. Eliza scrambled backward, knocking a mug off the counter. It shattered. The man's head snapped toward her. He raised the gun. Found you. Sweetheart. He grinned. Eliza screamed, not for Luca, but for her life. The scream tore from Eliza's throat, raw and terrified, but it was drowned out by the shattering of glass. The window behind the intruder exploded inward. Two figures swung into the small living room on rappel lines, their boots hitting the floor with a heavy, synchronized thud. Before the man in the hoodie could pull the trigger, a taser probe hit him square in the chest. He convulsed and dropped the gun, collapsing to the floor in a heap. The front door burst open a split second later. 3 more men in tactical gear flooded the apartment. One of them was the scarred bodyguard from the diner, the one who had first told her Alicia's name. He moved with terrifying speed, kicking the pistol away from the fallen intruder and securing the room. "Clear," he barked into his earpiece. He turned to Eliza, who was pressed against the kitchen cabinets, the kitchen knife still trembling in her hand. "Miss Eliza, you are safe now." Eliza dropped the knife. It clattered loudly against the linoleum. Her legs gave way, and she slid down the cabinets to the floor, gasping for air. They had been seconds away. Just seconds. "Mr. Romano sent us," the bodyguard said, his voice surprisingly gentle for a man of his size. "He has been tracking the bounty hunters since the order went out. We were 2 minutes behind this one. We apologize for the delay." "Take me back," Eliza whispered, her voice shaking so hard the words barely formed. "Please, just take me back." The drive back to the estate was a blur of lights and rain. Eliza sat in the back of the armored SUV, wrapped in a shock blanket, staring out at the city that had turned against her. She realized now that there was no running. There was no normal life to go back to. The line had been crossed, and she was on the other side. When the car pulled up to the mansion, Luca was standing on the steps. He was wearing the same clothes he had worn when she left, his shirt rumpled, his eyes hollow and dark. He looked like a man who had been eroding from the inside out. Eliza didn't wait for the driver to open the door. She scrambled out. "Eliza!" Luca choked out. Stumbling down the steps, she collided with him, burying her face in his chest. His arms wrapped around her instantly, crushing her against him, holding her so tight it almost hurt. He buried his face in her neck, breathing her in, shaking uncontrollably. "I thought I lost you," he whispered into her hair. "I thought I was too late. He was there," Eliza sobbed, clutching his shirt. "He was right there. Luca." "I know," Luca said, his voice thick with a murderous grief. "I know, never again, I swear to you, never again." He carried her inside, not letting her feet touch the ground until they were in the sanctuary of the master bedroom. He sat her on the edge of the bed and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. His thumbs brushed away the tears that were still falling. "I was wrong," Luca said, looking up at her with an intensity that seared her soul. "I thought I could protect you by pushing you away, but I cannot protect you if you are not here, and I cannot breathe if you are not here. I was so stupid, Moa," Eliza said, wiping her eyes. "I thought I could just go back to being a waitress. I thought if I left, the target would disappear." "You are not a waitress anymore," Luca said fiercely. "You are the heart of this house, and without a heart, the body dies." He rose and kissed her. It was a kiss of desperate reclamation. There was no hesitation this time, no fear of boundaries. He needed to feel that she was alive, that she was warm, that she was his. They fell back onto the bed, tangling together in a frenzy of relief and need. Luca touched her with a reverence bordering on worship, his hands mapping every inch of her body as if verifying she was whole. He whispered her name over and over against her skin, a mantra of gratitude. "I need you," he murmured, pressing his forehead against hers as the storm of passion settled into a quiet, heavy intimacy. "Not just because I want you, but because you make me feel human. When you are gone, I am just the suit, I am just the gun. When you are here, I am a man." Eliza stroked his hair, looking into the eyes of the most feared man in the city. She saw the cracks in the foundation. She saw the exhaustion of a lifetime spent looking over his shoulder. "I will stay," Eliza whispered, "but I have conditions." Luca pulled back slightly to look at her. "Anything. No retaliation," she said firmly. "The man who broke into my apartment, the people who put the bounty on me. You stop them, yes, but you do not torture them. You do not start a massacre in my name. If I stay, I will not be the reason for a bloodbath." Luca's jaw tightened. His instinct, the instinct honed over 20 years of violence, was to burn the city to the ground for touching her. But he looked at her face, soft and pleading, and he saw the line she was drawing. She would love the man, but she would not love the monster. "I promise." Luca lied. It was a necessary lie. He would not turn the streets red with open warfare, but he could not let this slide. He knew something she did not. The bounty hadn't come from an external enemy alone. It had been facilitated from the inside. Someone in his inner circle had given the rival gang her location. Someone had opened the gate. "I promise," he repeated, kissing her palm. "Peace. For you." The next week was a study in contrasts. By day, the mansion was a fortress of domestic warmth. Eliza moved into the main bedroom, her presence softening the stark edges of Luca's life. She filled the vases with fresh flowers. She opened the curtains that had been drawn for years. But by night, while Eliza slept, Luca was in the basement war room, hunting a ghost. His empire was fracturing. Shipments were being intercepted. Safe houses were being raided. The mole was bleeding him dry, piece by piece. Luca worked in silence, reviewing phone logs, bank transfers, and surveillance footage, narrowing down the list of suspects. He felt the walls closing in, but he kept the panic hidden behind a mask of calm for Eliza and Alicia. The tension culminated on a Friday evening, the night of the elementary school winter play. It was a high-society private school, the kind where parents drove imported cars and wore diamonds to afternoon pickup. Luca had always hated these events, feeling the judgment of the legitimate elite radiating toward him. But Alicia had the role of the winter fairy, and she had been practicing her 3 lines for weeks. The auditorium was packed. Luca sat in the back row, flanked by 2 guards, trying to be invisible. Eliza sat next to him, holding his hand. She wore a simple, elegant navy dress, looking every bit the part of a mother figure, though she lacked the ring. When the curtain rose, the stage was transformed into a cardboard forest. Children in costumes stumbled about, reciting lines in high-pitched voices. Then it was Alicia's turn. She walked out from stage right. She was wearing a silver dress with wired wings, her crutches decorated with tinsel to match. She moved slowly, her braces clicking faintly on the wooden stage. A hush fell over the room. It was not a respectful hush. It was awkward. From the row in front of them, 2 women with perfectly coiffed hair leaned their heads together. Their whispers were loud enough to drift back to Eliza and Luca. "It is a shame, really," one woman murmured. "You would think with all that blood money, he could fix her." "It ruins the aesthetic of the play," the other whispered back. "Why didn't they just put her in the choir? Watching her struggle is uncomfortable." Luca stiffened. His hand tightened around Eliza's until his knuckles turned white. He started to rise, a dark, dangerous energy radiating from him. He was going to cause a scene. He was going to make them regret their words. Eliza squeezed his hand hard, stopping him. "No," she whispered. "Watch." On stage, Alicia had frozen. She'd heard the murmurs, or perhaps she just felt the weight of 300 pairs of eyes staring at her legs instead of her wings. She forgot her lines. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She looked terrified, her eyes scanning the dark audience, looking for safety. The silence stretched, agonizing and cruel. A few children on stage giggled. Eliza didn't hesitate. When she stood up. She didn't yell, and she didn't cause a scene. She simply walked down the center aisle, her head held high, her heels clicking with purpose. She walked up the stairs to the stage, ignoring the shocked gasps of the teachers in the wings. She walked right up to Alicia, who was trembling, on the verge of tears. Eliza knelt down, fixing a piece of tinsel on the girl's crutch that had come loose. Then she took Alicia's hand and turned to face the audience. She looked directly at the 2 women in the front row, her gaze burning with a fierce, protective fire. "You are doing beautifully," Eliza said, her voice clear and projected, reaching the back of the room. "You are the strongest fairy in the forest. Everyone is waiting for your magic." She squeezed Alicia's hand. "Tell them, sweetie." Alicia looked at Eliza, drawing strength from her calm presence. She took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and raised her chin. "Winter is not the end," Alessia recited, her voice ringing out clear and true. "It is the sleep before the flowers wake up." Eliza smiled, squeezed her hand one last time, and walked off the stage to the side, standing in the wings as the play continued. When Alicia finished, the applause was polite, but when she looked at the side stage and saw Eliza beaming at her with 2 thumbs up, the girl's smile outshone the stage lights. Luca sat in the back, frozen. He had been ready to meet cruelty with violence. He had been ready to hurt those women. But Eliza had met cruelty with grace. She had not just defended Alicia, she had empowered her. She had walked into the fire and turned it into warmth, for the first time in his life. Luca looked at his hands that had been strangled, beaten, and shot, and felt a profound sense of shame. He looked at Eliza, standing in the wings, adjusting Alicia's wings as the curtain fell. He didn't want to be the boss anymore. He didn't want the power if it meant his daughter lived in a world where he had to threaten people to get them to respect her. He wanted to be the man Eliza saw. The ride home was celebratory. Alessia was high on adrenaline, recounting every mistake the other kids had made and how she had remembered her lines perfectly. Eliza listened raptly, praising her, laughing with her when they got home. Eliza helped Alicia change out of her costume. She wiped the stage makeup off the girl's face with a tenderness that broke Luca's heart. "Eliza," Alessia asked sleepily as she was tucked into bed. "Yes, honey. Are you going to be my mom now?" The question hung in the dim light of the bedroom. Eliza paused, her hand resting on the duvet. She looked at Luca, who was standing in the doorway. "I am going to be here," Eliza said softly. "I'm going to be your family. Is that okay?" "Yes," Alessia whispered, closing her eyes. "That is okay." When Eliza finally left the room, she found Luca waiting in the hallway, and he didn't say a word. He took her hand and led her down the stairs, through the kitchen and out the back door into the expansive garden. The night was cold, but Luca had built a fire in the large stone fire pit near the cliff's edge. Beside the fire pit was a stack of boxes. "What is this?" Eliza asked, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. "My past," Luca said. He walked over to the boxes. He reached into the first one and pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger. It contained the names of every corrupt cop on his payroll, every smuggling route, every debt owed to the Romano family. It was worth millions in leverage. He tossed it into the fire. Eliza gasped. "Luca, what are you doing?" "I am making room," he said. He reached into the next box. It was full of cassette tapes and hard drives, blackmail material he had collected for a decade. He threw them in. The plastic hissed and popped as the flames licked around them. Then he reached for the final item. It was a sleek, black handgun, the one he carried in his shoulder holster every day, the one that had taken more lives than he cared to count. He held it for a moment, feeling the weight of the steel. It was heavy with history. It was the symbol of his power. "You said I couldn't raise her in blood," Luca said, staring into the flames. "You were right, and I cannot love you with hands that are covered in it." "Luca," Eliza stepped forward, her eyes wide. "You can't just—" "Stop. They will come for you. Let them come," Luca said calmly. "I have enough money buried in offshore accounts to disappear, to take you and Alessia somewhere they will never find us, somewhere with no walls and no guards." He looked at her, the firelight illuminating a new determination in his face. "I am done. Eliza, I am retiring. Tonight, the Romano Empire burns." He tossed the gun into the fire. It landed with a dull thud among the burning books. He walked over to her, smelling of smoke and winter air. He took her face in his hands. "I want to be the man who makes breakfast," he whispered. "I want to be the man who sits in the front row of the play and doesn't check the exits. I want to be yours." Eliza looked at him, tears streaming down her face. She saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't just saying it to keep her. He was terrified, stripped of his armor, but he was free. "Then let it burn," she whispered, pulling him down for a kiss. Behind them, the sparks rose into the dark sky, carrying the ashes of a criminal empire up toward the stars, leaving only a man, a woman, and a sleeping child in the silence below. But even as they held each other, Luca's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it, but the screen lit up with a text message from an unknown number. "I know what you are doing. Luca, you can't leave. Not until you pay for what you did. The mole was watching." And the fire in the garden was not the only thing about to burn. The morning fog had lifted, leaving the city beneath a sky of piercing, brilliant blue. It was the kind of crisp winter day that usually signaled a fresh start, but inside the Romano estate, the air was thick with the static of unsaid goodbyes. Eliza zipped up Alessia's winter coat, smoothing the collar with trembling hands. They were leaving today. Luca had arranged for a private plane to take them to a safe house in Switzerland while he dismantled the final pieces of his empire. But first, there was one last loose end. Alessia had insisted on saying goodbye to her friends at school. Luca had argued against it, his paranoia vibrating off him like heat waves, but Eliza had interceded. She argued that disappearing without a trace would traumatize the girl. They agreed on a compromise. 1 hour, a heavily armored van, 4 guards, and Eliza would go with her. "You look like a snowball," Eliza teased gently, tapping Alicia's nose. Alicia giggled, though the sound was thin. "Are you coming to school with me?" "I'm sitting right next to you the whole way," Eliza promised. Luca met them at the front door. He looked exhausted, his eyes rimmed with red, his jaw set in a line of granite. He checked the bulletproof vest under Eliza's coat, his hands lingering on her waist. "I do not like this," he murmured, his voice rough. "It is 3 miles. Luca," Eliza said, trying to project a calm she did not feel. "We drop her off. She hands out her goodbye cards. We pick her up. You said the route was clear." "The road is never clear," Luca said darkly. He kissed Eliza hard, a kiss that tasted of fear and desperation. Then he knelt and kissed Alessia's forehead. "Be brave, little bird. Papa is right behind you." He wasn't lying. As the armored van pulled out of the gates, Luca's black SUV followed close behind, flanked by 2 other security vehicles. It was a presidential motorcade for a man who was about to abdicate his throne. The drive was tense. Eliza held Alessia's hand, watching the city roll by through the tinted, reinforced glass. They were 5 blocks from the school, passing through a narrow underpass, when the world exploded. There was no warning. A heavy sanitation truck suddenly swerved from the opposing lane, slamming diagonally across the road, blocking the exit of the tunnel. The driver of the van slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching in protest as the heavy vehicle skidded to a halt. "Heads down!" the driver shouted. Before Eliza could process the command, the rear doors of the sanitation truck flew open. Men with automatic weapons spilled out at the same time. 2 SUVs boxed them in from behind, cutting off Luca's car. "Get down!" Eliza screamed. She unbuckled her seatbelt and threw herself over Alicia. Pressing the girl's face into the leather seat, she covered Alessia's small body with her own, curling into a protective shell just as the first hail of bullets struck the van. The sound was deafening. The reinforced glass spiderwebbed under the impact, but held. The metal hull rang like a bell being struck by 1,000 hammers. Alessia screamed, a high, terrified sound that tore at Eliza's heart. "It is okay. Shh, I have you," Eliza chanted, her eyes squeezed shut, her body shaking. "I am right here." Outside, chaos erupted. Luca's men had engaged the attackers. The tunnel echoed with the roar of gunfire and the shouting of men. "They are breaching the door," the driver yelled, drawing his weapon. A heavy thud shook the van, then another. The side door groaned as a crowbar was jammed into the seam. Eliza looked around frantically. There was nowhere to run. She grabbed the only weapon she had, a heavy metal thermos from Alessia's backpack, and held it like a club, crouching over the weeping child. The door was wrenched open. A man in a ski mask lunged inside. Eliza didn't think. She swung the thermos with every ounce of strength she possessed. It connected with the man's temple with a sickening crack. He grunted and stumbled back, falling out of the van, but another man was right behind him. He raised a gun. Eliza shielded Alessia again, squeezing her eyes shut, waiting for the end. Bang! The shot was loud, close. But Eliza felt no pain. She opened her eyes. The gunman crumpled to the ground. Standing in the opening, smoke rising from the barrel of his gun, was Luca. He looked like a demon rising from the underworld. His coat was torn. Blood was trickling from a cut on his forehead, and his eyes were black pits of fury. He reached in, grabbing Eliza by the arm. "Move!" he roared. He pulled them out of the van. The tunnel was a war zone. Cars were abandoned, smoke filled the air, and bodies lay on the asphalt. But the shooting had stopped. Luca's men had neutralized the threat, except for one. At the end of the tunnel, standing by the sanitation truck, was a man in a tan trench coat. He was clapping slowly. It was Moretti, the rival boss, the man who had put the price on Eliza's head. He was surrounded by 5 of his own men, all with weapons raised. Luca's men leveled their guns in return. It was a standoff. "Bravo, Luca!" Moretti shouted, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "I thought you had gone soft. I thought domestic life had dull teeth. But look at you, still a killer." Luca pushed Eliza and Alicia behind him. He stepped forward, raising his gun. His hand was steady. His intention was clear. He was going to kill Moretti. He was going to end this the only way he knew how. "Luca, don't!" Eliza grabbed the back of his coat. "He tried to kill you," Luca snarled, not looking back. "He tried to kill my daughter. And if you kill him now, it never ends," Eliza pleaded, her voice cracking. "Look around you. Luca, we are in the middle of the street. People are watching. The police are coming." "I do not care about the police," Luca said coldly. He took another step toward Moretti. "I care," Eliza shouted. She stepped out from behind him, placing herself between Luca and his target. "Eliza, move!" Luca yelled, panic flashing in his eyes. "No!" Eliza stood her ground, her chest heaving. "You promised me. Luca, you promised no more retaliation. You promised we were leaving this behind. He is right there." Luca pointed his gun past her. "He has a disease. I have to cut him out. If you pull that trigger, you lose us," Eliza said. Her voice was quieter now, but it carried more power than the gunfire had. "Look at your daughter." Luca's eyes flickered to the side. Alessia was huddled by the wheel of the van, watching them. Her eyes were wide, filled with terror. She wasn't looking at Moretti. She was looking at her father. "She will grow up remembering this moment," Eliza said, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. "Do you want her to remember you as her protector, or as a murderer? Do you want her to fear you?" Luca's hand trembled. He looked at Moretti, who was sneering, waiting for the show. Then he looked at Alessia. He saw the fear Eliza was talking about. It broke him. He let out a breath that sounded like a dying man. Slowly, agonizingly, he lowered the gun. "We are done," Luca said to Moretti, his voice flat. "Take your men. The territory is yours. Just let us go." Moretti blinked. Stunned. He had expected a fight. He had expected the monster. When he realized Luca was actually surrendering, a cruel grin spread across his face. "You really have gone soft." Moretti laughed. "You think you can just walk away? In this life? You live in a box." Moretti raised his own gun. "No!" Eliza screamed, but Moretti didn't aim for Luca. He aimed for Eliza. It happened in a fraction of a second. Moretti lunged forward, firing wildly. Luca didn't fire back. He didn't dive for cover. He threw himself in front of Eliza, spinning her away, turning his back to the shooter to shield her and Alessia. Crack! Crack! 2 shots rang out. Luca jerked violently. He grunted a low, guttural sound of pain, and his leg buckled. He collapsed to one knee, but he did not fall. He planted his hands on the asphalt, creating a human cage over Eliza and Alessia, shielding them with his broad back as Moretti's men opened fire. Then the sirens wailed. Blue and red lights flooded the tunnel. The police had arrived, swarming the entrance. Moretti, realizing he had stayed too long, scrambled toward his truck, but it was too late. SWAT teams poured in from the exit. "Don't move! Drop your weapons!" Luca stayed kneeling. He was breathing hard, sweat and blood dripping from his face. "Luca!" Eliza scrambled out from under him, terrified. She saw the blood pooling around his thigh. "You are shot! Oh my God, you are shot!" "I am okay," Luca rasped, his face gray. He looked at Alessia. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "I am okay, Papa," Alessia sobbed, throwing her arms around his neck. Luca winced, but he hugged her back with a fierce intensity. A news van had arrived with the police. A camera crew was running toward them, sensing the story of the decade, the downfall of the Romano crime family, captured alive. "Luca, the cameras," Eliza warned, trying to wipe the blood from his face. "We need to hide you." "No," Luca said. He gritted his teeth. He grabbed Eliza's hand, with a groan of agony that he swallowed before it could become a scream. He forced himself to stand. His left leg was useless, bleeding heavily through his trousers. He swayed, threatening to topple, but he locked his knee and stood tall. He did not cover his face. He did not hide in the shadows. He stood in the bright glare of the news lights, holding his daughter's hand on one side and Eliza's hand on the other. He looked directly into the camera. He wasn't the untouchable crime boss anymore. He was a man who was bleeding. He was a father who was terrified. He was a partner who had chosen love over war. The paramedics rushed forward with a stretcher. Luca waved them off for a second. He looked down at Eliza. "I didn't shoot," he whispered, his voice thick with pain but laced with a strange, beautiful pride. "I know," Eliza cried, pressing her forehead to his shoulder. "I know." Then his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed into the waiting arms of the medics. 6 months later, the ribbon-cutting ceremony was a small affair, but the turnout was impressive. The new community center in the heart of the city's poorest district was a gleaming structure of glass and brick, designed specifically for children with physical disabilities. A banner hung above the entrance, the Alicia Foundation. Eliza stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. She wore a cream-colored business suit, her hair pulled back, looking every inch the director of the charity. She smiled at the parents, the donors, and the children who were already exploring the wheelchair-accessible playground behind her. "We believe," Eliza said into the microphone, her voice steady and warm, "that every child deserves a chance to fly, no matter the obstacles, no matter where they come from." The crowd applauded. Eliza stepped down, her eyes searching the perimeter. He was standing near the back, leaning on a cane. Luca Romano looked different. The sharp, predatory edge was gone, replaced by a quiet stoicism. He wore a simple blue sweater and jeans, the uniform of a man who spent his days on construction sites, checking blueprints and arguing about cement grades. His construction firm, Romano Builds, was legitimate. It was hard work, and the profit margins were slim compared to his old life. But the money was clean. He walked toward her. His gait was uneven. The bullet had shattered his femur, and despite 3 surgeries, the limp was permanent. He moved with a rhythmic step-click step of his cane. People didn't part in fear like they used to. Some nodded at him respectfully. One man, a father of a child in the program, shook his hand. Luca reached Eliza and Alessia, who was wearing her school uniform and beaming with pride. "You were good," Luca said to Eliza, his voice soft. "I had a good speechwriter." Eliza smiled, straightening his collar. "How is the site?" "Dusty," Luca replied. "And the foreman is an idiot, but the foundation is solid." "Solid is good," Eliza said. Alicia tugged on Luca's sleeve. "Papa, look, the swing set fits my braces." "I know, little bird," Luca smiled, ruffling her hair. "I measured it myself." Alessia ran off to join the other children. Luca and Eliza stood alone for a moment, watching her. The sirens and the gunshots of the tunnel felt like a lifetime ago, a nightmare they had woken up from. Luca turned to Eliza. He took her hand, his thumb tracing the simple gold band on her finger, not a wedding ring yet, but a promise ring. He looked at the building, then at his daughter laughing in the sun, and finally at the woman who had pulled him out of the dark. "They still stare sometimes," Luca said, gesturing to his leg. "They see the limp and they remember who I was." "Let them remember," Eliza said fiercely. "Let them see that you walked through fire and came out the other side." Luca shook his head slowly. "I didn't come out. You pulled me out." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles right there in front of the cameras, the parents, and the city that used to fear him. "You didn't just save me. Eliza," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You made me someone worth saving." Eliza smiled, leaning up to kiss him. "You were always worth saving. Luca, you just needed someone to remind you." As they turned to walk toward their daughter, Luca leaned heavily on his cane, but he didn't falter. He had Eliza's arm to steady him, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't watching the shadows. He was walking into the light. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey of redemption, love, and the power of choosing family over power. I would love to know what you thought of Luca and Eliza's ending. Did you think Luca made the right choice in the tunnel? Please leave a comment down below telling me where you are listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this emotional ride, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new chapter. Share your thoughts in English in the comments section. I read every single one. Until next time, keep believing in love.